"Excuse me, sir, but this establishment is not for people like you," the security guard sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he blocked the entrance. The man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, simply smiled, a calm, knowing glint in his eyes. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a single aged photograph. When the restaurant manager, alerted by the commotion, saw the image, his face drained of all color. Elias Thorne, a man whose name echoed in newsrooms and political circles across the nation, stood tall despite the blatant disrespect. At 52, his career as an investigative journalist had exposed corruption and injustice at the highest levels. Tonight, however, he wasn't here on assignment. He was simply hoping for a quiet dinner at the Gilded Spoon, a renowned upscale restaurant in downtown Manhattan, a place he hadn't visited in years. The crisp autumn air outside felt a stark contrast to the suffocating tension building in the opulent foyer. The problem was clear and immediate: blatant racial discrimination in a place that prided itself on exclusivity, yet clearly confused wealth with worth and appearance with belonging. The guard's words, backed by the passive stance of the manager, were a direct challenge not just to Elias's dignity, but to the very principles he had fought for his entire life. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a deeper rot. This encounter, seemingly minor, would set in motion a chain of events that would expose uncomfortable truths and challenge the power structures that allowed such prejudice to fester. The guard's simple act of barring entry wasn't the end of Elias's evening, but the unexpected beginning of a very public reckoning. Will the photograph be enough to turn the tables, or is this just the first layer of a much larger, uglier truth waiting to be uncovered? If you're finding this story intriguing so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see where our story is reaching. The Gilded Spoon was more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of old money and exclusivity in Manhattan. Its walls were adorned with art that whispered of generations of wealth, its clientele a mix of finance titans, political figures, and old New York families. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the low hum of privileged conversation. For Elias Thorne, who had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, such places had always represented a world deliberately kept separate from his own. His success hadn't erased the memory of that divide. It had merely allowed him to cross the threshold, a journey many before him couldn't make. The manager, Mr. Sterling, a man whose slicked-back hair and nervous disposition seemed ill-suited for the confrontational nature of his job, finally stammered, "Mr. Thorne, I wasn't aware." His eyes darted from Elias to the photograph in his hand, a picture of a younger Sterling standing beside a younger, vibrant woman, Elias's late mother. It was a photo taken decades ago, a forgotten connection to a time before the Gilded Spoon, before Sterling's rise to managing this temple of elite dining. The security guard, a hulking man named Davis, remained oblivious, his arms still crossed, a look of stubborn authority on his face. He saw only a black man being disruptive, not the renowned journalist who had brought down corrupt officials and exposed corporate malfeasance. His world was black and white, orders and compliance, and he had been given an implicit order by the restaurant's culture. Certain people didn't belong. His motivation wasn't purely personal, it was ingrained, a reflection of the systemic biases that permeated the establishment. Elias's mother, Eleanor Thorne, had been a force of nature, a community organizer who believed in justice and equality. She had briefly worked for the Sterling family many years ago, a detail Sterling clearly wished was buried deeper. The photograph wasn't just a memento, it was a bridge to a past Sterling wanted to forget, a past that contradicted the image of the man he now presented to the world. Elias understood the power of such connections, the way a single thread could unravel a carefully constructed facade. He looked not at Sterling or Davis, but at the opulent surroundings, seeing them not just as decor but as layers of a system built on exclusion. The other patrons, initially oblivious, now cast curious, some even disdainful glances. The quiet hum of conversation had died down, replaced by a tense silence. This wasn't just about getting a table anymore. The tension in the foyer thickened. Sterling, visibly sweating, tried to usher Elias away from the main entrance, muttering apologies and attempting to regain control. "Mr. Thorne, please, let's discuss this privately. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Elias held up a hand, his voice calm but carrying across the now silent room. "A misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling. Your employee just informed me this establishment is not for people like me. Is that the official policy of the Gilded Spoon?" Davis, the guard, shifted uncomfortably, sensing the shift in power but still too proud or too foolish to back down entirely. "He was causing a disturbance," Davis interjected, pointing a thick finger at Elias. "Refused to leave when asked." "Refused to leave after being told I didn't belong here," Elias countered, raising an eyebrow. He turned his gaze directly onto Davis. "Do you make that judgment based on how someone looks, officer?" Sterling flinched at the word officer, realizing the implications if Davis was off duty or acting beyond his authority. "Davis is our head of security," Sterling quickly clarified, though his voice lacked conviction. He is usually very professional." The conflict escalated beyond a simple refusal of service. It was now a public confrontation about race, class, and the abuse of power. Other diners began to whisper, some pulling out phones to record the scene. A woman in a fur coat sniffed disdainfully, while a younger couple looked on with expressions of shock and disapproval. Elias felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just his humiliation. It was a reflection of countless others who faced similar indignities daily without the platform he possessed. He knew Sterling's connection to his mother was a weakness, a leverage point. But the core issue was Davis's discriminatory actions, enabled by the environment of the restaurant. The conflict wasn't just with these two men, but with the systemic issues they represented. Elias needed to expose not just the incident, but the culture that allowed it to happen. He thought of his mother, of her tireless fight against injustice, and a quiet resolve hardened within him. This wasn't just about revenge for a personal slight. It was about honoring her legacy and striking a blow against the kind of prejudice she had dedicated her life to fighting. The stakes were no longer just a dinner reservation. They were about accountability and change. The path forward was becoming clear, and it wouldn't be a quiet one. Elias Thorne's mind raced, processing the layers of this unexpected confrontation. The initial insult from Davis was one thing, but Sterling's reaction, tied to the photograph of his mother, opened a different, more complex avenue. This wasn't just about a prejudiced security guard. It was about the history embedded within the very foundations of the Gilded Spoon, and perhaps within the lives of those who ran it. He remembered snippets his mother had shared about her time working for a wealthy family when she was young, not the Sterlings directly, but connected to them somehow. She rarely spoke of it. Only mentioning it was a difficult period, marked by subtle and sometimes not so subtle acts of discrimination. The photograph was a puzzle piece he hadn't known existed. Why would Sterling, the manager of this elite establishment, have a photo of himself with a young black woman who worked for a connected family decades ago? And why would seeing it cause him such obvious distress? This sub-trauma, linked to his mother's past and Sterling's present, added a personal, almost fated dimension to the public humiliation Elias was enduring. Meanwhile, the incident was rapidly gaining traction. Patrons with phones were live-streaming the standoff. Social media was beginning to buzz with mentions of discrimination at Gilded Spoon. Elias, acutely aware of the power of public opinion and the speed of the digital age, knew this window of opportunity wouldn't last forever. He had a flight to catch the next morning for a major conference where he was scheduled to speak about social justice issues. The clock was ticking, adding a temporal pressure to his actions. He needed to handle this swiftly and decisively if he wanted to leverage the moment. He also noticed a young waiter, a person of color, watching the scene unfold with wide, fearful eyes. Their shared glance was brief, but it spoke volumes of understanding, of frustration, and of the quiet indignities faced daily within these walls. This interaction, though silent, reinforced for Elias that his fight wasn't just personal. It was for that waiter, and for everyone else who felt invisible or unwelcome in spaces that should be open to all who could afford them. This secondary character, previously just part of the background, now represented the silent majority affected by such prejudice. Elias decided to press the issue with Sterling, not just about Davis, but about the photograph. "Mr. Sterling," he said, his voice softer now, drawing Sterling closer, away from the immediate glare of the crowd, though still within earshot of some. "This photograph, it's of my mother, Eleanor Thorne. You seem to know her. Tell me, what is your connection?" Sterling paled further, glancing nervously at Davis, then back at Elias. Eleanor. Yes, a long time ago. It's complicated. His reluctance was palpable, suggesting a history he desperately wanted to keep hidden. This reluctance became a new obstacle, a lock on a door Elias needed to open to fully understand the context of the restaurant's behavior. Davis, sensing the conversation shifting away from his actions, interjected again, trying to reassert his authority. Look, are you going to leave or do I need to call the police? His threat, though common, felt hollow now that Elias's identity was beginning to surface among the patrons and Sterling was clearly rattled. But it still represented a potential escalation, a new layer of conflict Elias had to navigate. Elias ignored Davis for a moment, focusing on Sterling. Complicated how, Mr. Sterling? Does it have anything to do with why your security thinks people like my mother or people like me don't belong here? He was connecting the sub-trauma of his mother's past to the main conflict of present-day discrimination, suggesting a historical route to the restaurant's exclusionary practices. The unresolved history hinted at in the photograph was now directly influencing the current confrontation, adding depth and complexity to the narrative. He needed to push Sterling to make him uncomfortable enough to reveal the truth before the moment passed and the gilded spoon could sweep the incident under the rug. The clock was ticking, and the eyes of the digital world were watching. The immediate aftermath of Elias's confrontation sent ripples through the gilded spoon. Sterling, cornered and exposed, visibly crumbled under the weight of the public spectacle and the history tied to the photograph. He stammered, trying to pull Elias further away, his voice a low, desperate plea. Mr. Thorne, please, this is causing a scene. We can resolve this. Davis was out of line, I assure you. He will be disciplined. Davis, realizing the severity of the situation and the potential consequences for his job, finally dropped his arrogant stance. His face, previously set in defiance, now showed a flicker of fear. He looked from Sterling to Elias, then at the phones pointed in their direction, the reality of the situation hitting him. His earlier bravado evaporated, replaced by a sullen silence. The power dynamic had completely flipped. The patrons who had been whispering and recording now had undeniable footage of the incident and Sterling's panicked reaction. Some openly voiced their disapproval of the restaurant's actions, while others, the old guard, looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing the potential damage to the establishment's carefully curated image. The young waiter, previously fearful, now watched Elias with a look of cautious hope, a silent acknowledgement that someone was finally challenging the status quo. News of the incident spread like wildfire online. Within minutes, headlines began to appear on social media feeds. Renowned journalist denied entry to upscale restaurant. Racial profiling alleged at the Gilded Spoon. Manager linked to journalist's family history. The narrative was no longer contained within the restaurant's walls. It was a public firestorm. Elias, observing the chaos he had inadvertently ignited, felt a complex mix of emotions. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing the discomfort of those who upheld such discriminatory practices, but also a weariness. This wasn't how he had intended to spend his evening. Yet, the reaction, the swift public outrage, confirmed the importance of speaking out. His personal slight had become a catalyst for a broader conversation about access, privilege, and prejudice in elite spaces. Sterling's desperate attempts to control the narrative were futile. The damage was done. His relationship with Davis was clearly strained, built on a foundation of implicit bias that had now been violently shaken. The restaurant's reputation, its most valuable asset, was now under siege. Elias's calm, measured response, coupled with the undeniable evidence of the guard's words and Sterling's reaction, had painted a clear picture for the online world. The consequences were unfolding rapidly, moving beyond the initial confrontation to impact careers and reputations. Elias knew this was just the beginning. The restaurant's owners would have to respond, and their response would determine the next phase of this unexpected battle. The morning after the incident at the Gilded Spoon, Elias Thorne woke not to the quiet routine he expected before his conference, but to a barrage of phone calls and messages. His agent, his editor, fellow journalists, and even some politicians were reaching out, commenting on the viral videos and news reports circulating about the previous night. The Gilded Spoon was issuing carefully worded public statements, attempting damage control, claiming the incident was a misunderstanding, and that the security guard Davis had been placed on temporary leave pending a full investigation. Sterling's name was notably absent from their initial statements. This corporate response, designed to minimize the fallout, presented Elias with a new challenge. They were trying to frame it as an isolated incident involving a rogue employee, rather than acknowledging the potential systemic issues he suspected were at play, particularly concerning Sterling's connection to his mother's past. Elias couldn't let them control the narrative. His initial goal was simply dinner. Now, it had evolved into ensuring accountability and highlighting the deeper problem. Instead of dwelling on the injustice or engaging in lengthy public monologues about his feelings, Elias shifted into investigative mode, a skill honed over decades. He tasked his assistant with digging into the Gilded Spoon's history, its ownership, and any past complaints or incidents. He also began making calls, leveraging his network to find out more about Sterling's background and his connection to the family his mother had worked for. This wasn't just about clearing his name or getting an apology. It was about uncovering the truth behind Sterling's reaction and the restaurant's culture. His approach was strategic and action-oriented. He wasn't seeking sympathy, he was seeking facts. This marked a subtle but significant growth from the initial shock and frustration he felt in the restaurant foyer. He was moving beyond being the target of discrimination to actively investigating its roots. He decided to postpone his flight, recognizing that this fight, was more important than his scheduled speech. His commitment to justice, a value instilled in him by his mother, was now driving his actions in a deeply personal way. He wasn't just reporting on injustice, he was living it and actively working to dismantle it, starting with this one seemingly isolated incident that was rapidly proving to be anything but. The challenge was no longer just getting into a restaurant, it was exposing what lay beneath its polished surface. Elias Thorne's investigation into the Gilded Spoon and Mr. Sterling unearthed layers of history, carefully buried beneath the restaurant's opulent facade. His team discovered that the family Elias's mother worked for decades ago were close associates of the original owners of the Gilded Spoon. More significantly, they found records indicating a legal dispute involving that family and a young employee around the time Elias's mother worked there. A dispute that was settled out of court and heavily sealed. While his mother wasn't named, the timing and circumstances were too coincidental to ignore. This new challenge wasn't just about proving current discrimination, it was about connecting it to a historical pattern, potentially involving Sterling or his family. Elias didn't just rely on his team, he hit the pavement. He visited the old neighborhood where his mother had lived and worked, talking to elderly residents who might remember that time. He wasn't asking leading questions or seeking confirmation bias. He was listening, gathering anecdotes and fragments of memory. This active pursuit of information, stepping away from the digital storm, showed his growth. He wasn't just reacting to the incident, but proactively building a case rooted in history and personal testimony. He faced resistance. Some people were reluctant to speak about the past, fearing repercussions or simply wanting to forget difficult times. He encountered dead ends in old archives and evasive answers from former employees of the associated families. These obstacles weren't just plot points, they were tests of his resolve, pushing him to find new angles and methods. He learned to navigate the subtle codes of silence in old money circles and the fear of speaking truth to power that still lingered in the community. One breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the young waiter from the Gilded Spoon. Inspired by Elias's stand, the waiter, risking their job, anonymously sent Elias internal memos detailing customer complaints about discriminatory treatment that had been systematically dismissed or downplayed by management, including Sterling. This act of courage, fueled by Elias's actions, demonstrated the ripple effect of his stand and provided concrete evidence of a pattern of behavior within the restaurant. Elias wasn't just fighting his own battle, his actions were empowering others to come forward. This wasn't about lengthy internal monologues on justice, it was about the tangible impact of one person's courage on others, leading to actionable intelligence that propelled the investigation forward. His journey had moved from personal offense to becoming a conduit for exposing systemic rot. With the information gathered, the historical links, the sealed legal dispute, and the internal memos from the waiter, Elias began to connect the dots. The sealed case likely involved an attempt to silence someone regarding mistreatment or discrimination, possibly tied to the same family his mother had worked for. Sterling's panic upon seeing the photograph suggested a direct personal connection to this hidden history. The internal memos proved that the discriminatory culture wasn't a one-off with Davis, but an ongoing issue ignored by management. Elias decided to use his platform strategically. He didn't release everything at once. First, he published an op-ed piece in a major newspaper, not just recounting his experience at the Gilded Spoon, but framing it within the broader context of subtle and overt discrimination in upscale establishments. He didn't name Sterling or reveal the full extent of his findings yet, creating tension and forcing the Gilded Spoon's ownership to respond more substantially than their initial damage control. This move resolved the immediate public relations sub-trauma. The restaurant could no longer dismiss it as a minor incident. The op-ed generated further public discussion and put immense pressure on the Gilded Spoon. Their stock took a hit, reservations were cancelled, and protests began to form outside their doors. The owners, a powerful old money family known for avoiding scandal, were furious. They demanded answers from Sterling, who was now under intense scrutiny from his superiors and the public. The net was tightening around him. Elias then prepared his main exposé. He compiled all the evidence, the historical records, the testimony from the neighborhood, the internal memos, and his own account. He focused on building a narrative that linked the past to the present, suggesting that the discriminatory incident he experienced wasn't an anomaly, but a manifestation of a long-standing culture within the restaurant, possibly rooted in the history connected to his mother and Sterling. He structured the article to build suspense, hinting at a deeper secret Sterling was hiding. He knew publishing this would be explosive. It would not only likely cost Sterling his job, but could also damage the reputation of the powerful family who owned the restaurant, and potentially reopen old wounds related to the sealed legal case. The stakes were incredibly high, but Elias felt a moral obligation to proceed. He reviewed the article meticulously, ensuring every claim was backed by evidence, preparing for the inevitable legal challenges and pushback. The tension mounted as he prepared to release the full story, knowing that once it was out, there would be no turning back. The climax was imminent, and it would be fought not with fists, but with facts and the power of public truth. The day Elias Thorne's full exposé dropped was a seismic event in the world of New York's elite, titled "Beneath the Gilded Surface, A Legacy of Exclusion." The article meticulously detailed the incident at the restaurant, but then delved much deeper. It revealed the historical connection between Sterling and Elias's mother, tracing it back to the family she worked for, who were revealed to be the original partners in the Gilded Spoon. Elias presented the evidence of the sealed legal case from decades prior, strongly implying it involved a cover-up of discriminatory practices against an employee, mirroring the type of behavior he experienced. The internal memos provided undeniable proof that the restaurant's management, including Sterling, had been aware of and ignored multiple complaints of discrimination. The article culminated in a powerful indictment of the Gilded Spoon, arguing that the incident with Elias was not an isolated act by a rogue guard, but a symptom of a culture of exclusion that had persisted for generations, protected by wealth and silence. Elias didn't just report the facts. He wove them into a narrative that resonated with a public increasingly aware of systemic injustice. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The Gilded Spoon was engulfed in scandal. The owners, desperate to salvage their reputation, held a press conference. Under intense questioning, they were forced to admit that Davis had been terminated and that Mr. Sterling had resigned effectively immediately. The pressure from the public, amplified by Elias's irrefutable evidence, was too great to withstand. Sterling's carefully constructed career, built on managing an image of exclusivity, collapsed under the weight of the past he tried to hide and the present he failed to control. The twist came when details emerged about the sealed lawsuit. While the full records remained confidential, a source close to the original case confirmed to another journalist, prompted by Elias's article, that Sterling, as a young man working in the family business, had been directly involved in the incident that led to the lawsuit, an incident involving the mistreatment of a young black employee. The photograph Elias's mother had was not just a memento. It was potentially evidence, a detail Sterling had desperately wanted to keep hidden, fearing it would expose his own complicity in the past. His panic wasn't just about the present, it was about the potential unraveling of his entire life, revealing him not just as a manager who tolerated discrimination, but as someone with a personal history intertwined with it. In the midst of the chaos, Elias remained composed. He gave interviews not to gloat, but to emphasize the larger issues at play. He spoke about the importance of challenging prejudice wherever it appears and the need for accountability, regardless of social standing. His transformation was complete. He had entered the Gilded Spoon as a man seeking dinner and left as a catalyst for change, using his skills and platform to expose a truth that had been buried for decades. The revenge wasn't petty or personal. It was the systemic dismantling of a culture of exclusion, a victory for justice fueled by a son honoring his mother's legacy. The Gilded Spoon, a symbol of untouchable privilege, had been forced to confront its own ugly reflection. The fallout from Elias Thorne's exposé continued to reshape the landscape around the Gilded Spoon. The restaurant, once a bastion of untouchable exclusivity, became a symbol of systemic prejudice. Its reputation was severely tarnished, leading to a mass exodus of its elite clientele and a significant drop in revenue. The owners, despite their initial attempts at damage control, faced ongoing public scrutiny and calls for deeper structural changes within their organization. The resignation of Mr. Sterling was just the first step. The incident forced a broader conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the hospitality industry, particularly in high-end establishments. Davis, the security guard, though initially just placed on leave, was ultimately terminated. While his actions were the catalyst, the investigation revealed his behavior was enabled by a culture that tacitly accepted, if not encouraged, profiling. His loss of employment was a direct consequence of his discriminatory act, amplified by the spotlight Elias shone on the restaurant's practices. Mr. Sterling, stripped of his prestigious position and exposed for his connection to a hidden past, faced a personal and professional reckoning. The revelation of his potential complicity in the historical incident added another layer to his downfall. He became a pariah within the circles he once navigated with ease. His attempts to find new employment in the industry were met with closed doors, his name now synonymous with the scandal. The revenge in his case was the loss of his status, his career, and his carefully guarded reputation, all consequences of his actions and the secrets he tried to keep buried. For Elias Thorne, the outcome was complex. While he achieved a significant victory in exposing the truth and holding the restaurant accountable, the process was taxing. He received widespread praise for his courage and journalistic integrity, solidifying his reputation as a powerful voice for justice. However, he also faced backlash from those who felt he had overstepped, or who were uncomfortable with the disruption of the status quo. He understood that dismantling deeply ingrained systems of prejudice was not a single event, but an ongoing struggle. His personal journey from being a target of discrimination to becoming an agent of change was complete. He had honored his mother's legacy not just through his work, but through his actions in a moment of personal challenge. The Gilded Spoon incident became another chapter in his long fight for a more just world, demonstrating that even the most fortified walls of privilege could be breached by truth and determination. The ending wasn't a fairy tale, but a realistic depiction of the consequences of both prejudice and the fight against it. Months after the scandal, the Gilded Spoon remained open, but it was a shadow of its former self. Its clientele had changed, becoming less exclusive, more diverse, a forced reflection of the public pressure it had endured. The owners, in a bid to regain trust, implemented new diversity training programs and hired a new management team, though many remained skeptical about the sincerity of these changes. The incident served as a cautionary tale for other establishments, a stark reminder that in the age of social media and increased awareness, discriminatory practices could no longer hide in plain sight. Elias Thorne continued his work, his voice amplified by the Gilded Spoon story. He used his platform to advocate for stronger anti-discrimination laws and to support organizations fighting for equality. He often received messages from individuals who had experienced similar incidents, inspired by his willingness to speak out. The young waiter from the Gilded Spoon, who had anonymously provided the internal memos, eventually left the restaurant and found a job at an establishment with a more inclusive culture, quietly thanking Elias through a mutual contact for giving them the courage to seek a better environment. The photograph of Elias's mother and a young Sterling remained a potent symbol. It wasn't just evidence of a hidden past, it was a reminder of the long arc of the struggle for equality, connecting generations of those who faced prejudice with those who fought against it. Elias kept the photo on his desk, a reminder of where he came from and why his work was so important. The revenge wasn't sweet or final, it was a continuous process of challenging injustice, one story, one fight at a time. Wow, what an intense story, wasn't it? Elias Thorne's journey shows us the power of truth and the importance of fighting against injustice, even in the most unexpected places. If you watched until the very end, comment, "I watched until the end." I'd love to know who followed this powerful narrative from start to finish. This story is a reminder that discrimination still exists, but also of the strength we have when we refuse to stay silent. What did you think of Elias's actions and the twist involving Sterling's past? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, click the video appearing on the end screen right now. We have other incredible stories waiting for you. Don't forget to leave a like if this story touched you in any way. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. And tell me what city you're watching from. Your participation is very important to us.